It was a cold morning in New York, the kind of chill that makes people hunch up and quicken their steps, ignoring everything around them. On the sidewalk, near a bustling coffee shop, sat George Miller, a 68-year-old man who had seen better days. His face bore the marks of time and struggles that only he truly understood. After losing his wife in a car accident and being laid off from his job as a laborer, he had ended up homeless, with nothing but a worn-out backpack and a broken guitar. That morning didn't seem any different from the others. People hurried by, clutching coffee in their hands, without even noticing George sitting in the corner with a small sign. War veteran. Just trying to survive. Thank you. He didn't expect much, perhaps a little spare change, maybe a smile. But that day, something unusual caught his attention. A well-dressed man, visibly frustrated, was standing near the street beside a luxury car that appeared to have broken down. Even from a distance, George could feel the tension radiating from the stranger. He watched the man check his phone, gesture irritably, and finally sit in the driver's seat, looking defeated. George observed from his position, feeling torn. He knew how easy it was to ignore other people's problems when your own life was in ruins, but something about the situation bothered him. Maybe it was the expression on the man's face, or the irony of such an expensive car being broken. George took a deep breath, fighting against his insecurities, and decided to approach. "Excuse me, sir," George said with his raspy but polite voice. Elon Musk looked up, clearly surprised by the interruption. He had been so absorbed in his thoughts that he hadn't noticed George there. "Are you okay? Looks like you're having car trouble." "Maybe I can help," George continued. Elon hesitated for a moment. It was clear he didn't expect a man with such a humble appearance to solve a problem that even technical support seemingly hadn't been able to fix. Still, there was something about George's demeanor, a mix of humility and confidence, that made him consider the offer. "I don't know. I think it's the electrical system." "These cars are complicated," Elon replied, crossing his arms. George gave a faint smile. "Complicated for those who don't understand them. But I've fixed everything in my life, from tank engines to old radios. It doesn't hurt to try." Elon glanced at his watch and sighed. He was late for an important meeting and honestly had no idea what else to do. "All right. If you think you can fix it, I'd appreciate it." George placed his backpack on the ground and began carefully inspecting the car. His calloused hands, marked by years of hard labor, were still steady and skilled. Using makeshift tools, a piece of wire he found in the trash and an old screwdriver he carried with him, he began to work. As George worked, Elon watched him with growing curiosity. He was used to dealing with high-performance engineers, people with prestigious degrees. Yet here was a man who clearly lacked the same resources but demonstrated impressive practical intelligence and determination. "Where did you learn to do this?" Elon asked, trying to mask his surprise. George shrugged as he continued tinkering with the engine. "Learned the hard way. In the army, you had to fix things with whatever you had on hand. Then I worked in garages for decades. You never know when those skills might come in handy." After about 20 minutes, George stepped back and wiped his hands on a rag. "Try starting it now," he said confidently. Elon got into the car and turned the key. The engine roared to life. He looked at George, surprised and relieved. "You actually fixed it. That's amazing." George smiled but shook his head. "It's nothing special. Just a temporary fix. But it'll get you where you need to go." Elon stepped out of the car and stood for a moment, looking at George. There was something about this man that intrigued him deeply. Not just the technical skill, but the attitude of someone who had lived through much, carrying heavy burdens without losing his dignity. "You saved my day. How much do I owe you for this?" Elon asked, already pulling out his wallet. George raised his hand, politely declining. "You don't owe me anything, sir. I'm just glad I could help. My father always said that if you can do something good for someone, you should do it without expecting anything in return." Elon was thoughtful. He was used to transactions. Everything in the business world was a trade, a negotiation. But here was a man who clearly had very little and yet offered his time and skill without asking for anything in return. "Can I at least know your name?" Elon asked. "George Miller," he replied with a faint smile. "Well, George Miller, you helped me at a critical moment. Can I ask you something else? What brought you here?" Elon gestured toward the sidewalk, the place where George had left his backpack and sign. George hesitated. It wasn't easy for him to talk about his fall in life. But there was something sincere in Elon's eyes that made him decide to share his story. He spoke about his years in the army, his work in garages, his love for his late wife, and how everything fell apart after an accident that drained his savings and left him adrift. Elon listened attentively, without interrupting, which was rare for someone accustomed to always leading the conversation. When George finished, Elon simply nodded, absorbing the weight of the story. "You've been through a lot, George," Elon finally said. "And yet here you are, helping someone like me. That's remarkable." Elon looked at his watch again. He was late, but something told him this moment was more important than any meeting. He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to George. "George, you have a talent that few people have today. Practical experience, skill, and, above all, character. I want you to go to this address tomorrow at 9 a.m. Ask for Karen in the HR department. Tell her Elon Musk sent you." George frowned, carefully holding the card. "Mr. Musk, I'm not looking for charity. That's not why I'm here." "And this isn't charity," Elon insisted. "It's an opportunity. A chance to use everything you've learned in life. Go and see for yourself." George hesitated but finally nodded. "I'll go, Mr. Musk." "Thank you." Elon shook George's hand, got into the car, and drove off, leaving George alone with the card in his hand. He looked at the address, still skeptical but feeling a spark of hope he hadn't felt in a long time.